Today I will paint anemone petal with a big water drop. Why do I need to paint petal? Because my next project will be a bigger anemone flower, and before starting bigger, more complex composition, it is very good to practice on something smaller, more easier, to get to know your subject, color mixes, texture of the surface of this flower. And then, after little practice, we can go on to bigger and more complex. Starting this tutorial with transferring line drawing, on the other side applying graphite layer. Remember, when you are transferring line drawing, the graphite lines should be really thin and light. Don't push too hard with the pencil when you are transferring. We don't want any rough marks of graphite left when we erase and when we paint. Graphite marks aren't beautiful together with watercolors on one subject. If we are mixing two mediums like graphite and watercolors, that is one thing. But if that is just an outline left after transferring and watercolor layer is showing that outline, that is not a beautiful thing in realistic watercolor painting. With elastic eraser, removing graphite marks. And another thing, I will be using watercolor mixes that I pre-mixed in my previous video, and they're still good. There's still plenty of those watercolor mixes on my palette, so I will be using them. You don't need to wash your palettes after mixing, trying, experimenting some watercolors. If they're completely alright for your new tutorial, you can use them. I'm using two water jars, one for washing and one for applying water layer. We can start painting this anemone petal. I have mixes from the previous video: ultramarine blue with permanent rose, ultramarine blue with red violet, indigo with pearl and violet, and indigo with permanent rose. Be sure that your water is clean after mixing watercolors if you are mixing from the beginning. Applying with round synthetic brush water layer to the whole surface of this petal. My petal is slightly enlarged. You can make it transfer it smaller or the same size, it's up to you. The bigger the surface, it's maybe a little bit more difficult to apply all smooth layers in one go. Starting with ultramarine blue and permanent rose and applying to the shadow area of this petal. We can clearly see in the reference that there are this slightly curved area on the petal. My first layer is still very light, very transparent, adding a little bit of ultramarine blue to my mix, applying on the upper tip of the petal where is also slightly darker area. Pushing watercolors where we need them while the surface is still a little bit moist, but not too much water, no puddles of water or watercolor mixes. Everything is very transparent and small amount of water on the surface. If I will lift my paper, nothing will drop or come off the paper. It's just a little bit moist on the surface of the paper. Careful with outer edges. Pushing watercolors towards the lighter area. Constantly checking reference. This is very important in realistic painting. We don't need to think and imagine something. Everything is visible in the reference. The lower part of the petal, the edge part, is slightly darker, and then we have a curve which is completely exposed to light. Also, water drop has two light highlights, which we will also leave out. I'm not using masking fluid and I will not be using any white paint. Smoothing the applied layer, leaving the light area light. And I'm leaving light area much wider than it appears in the reference, so I will not lose it while I'm applying layers of watercolors further. Now with a finer tip brush, we can wipe out the pigment to reveal some lighter petal veins. It can be done with clean and dry brush, adding a little bit darker area to the petal veins with a finer tip brush. And I'm still working in one go. The surface is still a little bit moist. Working accurately, not too precise at this stage. I'm just placing major tonal values for this petal in order later to move on these layers of shadow and light, halftones. But this is just the beginning, placing colors, seeing tonal values from the reference. Now let the layer dry, and then we can continue to the next one. Moving forward with more finer brush strokes using fine tip brush and watercolor mixes that we have on our color palette, which is ultramarine blue with permanent rose, we see on the petal a lot of little tiny petal veins and also little lines. I will be adding them with finer brush strokes. Now with the very tip of the brush, I'm outlining our water drop, which is big and beautiful in this case. And now zoom in closer your reference and really study the water drop. Here we can go really into detailing of a water drop. There is darker outline around the water drop. Then there on the lower part, which I'm painting right now, the shadow area is inside the water drop. Now carefully look at the reference. Do you see that there are these highlights and that the shadow area is inside the water drop? Now smoothing out the applied shadow area, and still this layer is very transparent. I will gradually build the realistic look of this water drop. We don't need to hurry anything. As I added this very transparent amount of shadow, we instantly see that our highlight is super light. Now on the other side of the water drop, shadow area is outside. It is casting shadow on the surface of the petal. and smoothing the applied shadow area. Let's take a closer look on petal veins. We see in the reference, take a closer look and study the reference, that line breaks. It goes from the petal, and where is the water drop? It slightly changes its placement. That's because the water drop is enlarging that area on which it stands. And as we are painting this petal super detailed, we need to consider these little changes. If this would be a bigger anemone flower with water drops, I would not go so much into detailing these petal veins. But as this petal is one only on our painting, this main composition is only this petal, and it is enlarged, we can really go into detailing also with petal veins and this water drop, more interesting, more eye-catching for the viewer. Adding more finer brush strokes, constantly checking reference. The reference is my guide in this painting, in any realistic painting. I don't need to think, imagine something, everything is there. With round synthetic brush, applying another layer of shadow in the curved area, which is the darkest area on this petal. Still, everything is transparent, everything is light. I'm going with the same watercolor mixes for the shadow and for the lighter area. Adding clean permanent rose, small amount to my color palette, and on the left side I notice on the reference photo that there's more of pink color. That's what happens when the more we look in the reference, explore it, the more we start to see, and we can do it and place what we saw in the reference to our painting. Another layer to the upper tip of this petal. another transparent layer to the inner part of water drop. As I mentioned, we will be slowly building this water drop. It all takes time, little more effort, more patience, and the result will be worth it. If you feel the urge, hurry things, make everything too dark too fast, better take a pause, go have a cup of tea, go for a walk, leave it for another day, and then come back relaxed and paint calmly, patiently further. With realistic watercolor painting, it's all about slow steps, gradual and transparent layers of watercolors. Adding more watercolor mix to my color palette, ultramarine blue and permanent rose. Don't be afraid to run out of watercolor mixes. You can always add another amount of watercolors. You know which pigments you used for mixing. If it will slightly differ, the color tone will slightly differ from the previous one, it doesn't matter. Your painting will only benefit from slightly different color tones. You are using the same pigments. And more finer brush strokes to the shadow area of this petal. Building layers gradually, constantly checking reference. Adding layer around water drop, I can see in the reference that this lower part of water drop and petal, it is slightly darker than I have on my painting compared to the reference. More shadow to the inner part of the water drop. The more layers are applied, the more realistic it starts to look. It's starting to pop up from the paper surface. This is only a matter of tonal values. I'm placing them, working with them gradually. If I will go straight with very dark watercolors, I can end up with a flat looking painting. Now I took a mix of indigo and permanent rose and applying a very small side shadow area on the right. We see in the reference that part of the petal is in the shadow and the corner of this right edge is slightly darker because it is a little bit curved and away from the light source, so there is this shadow area. We are not outlining everything, we're constantly checking reference. If the reference is showing us that there is this darker edge line, then we are painting it. And if on the other side there isn't any dark edge line, we are not painting it. Constantly check the reference. Everything is there. You don't need to add some extra details. You can leave something out, but you don't need to add something extra. Adding another layer to petal veins. They are more intense, more darker. Adding that gradually with each new layer, making them more obvious. And as we see in the reference, the middle petal vein, it looks like it consists of many smaller lines that what I'm painting with the very tip of the brush, adding few more lines, making it more like it is in the reference. Now with almost dry brush, I'm applying texture marks on the upper part of this petal, and the brush is almost dry, consists of light amount of pigment, and I'm brushing my brush against the surface with the side to make the texture that is visible in the reference, like those little dots. Here's the side view how I do that. I clean in paper towel so my brush is almost completely dry, and then I rub it with the side against the paper, creating these little dots that this texture looks in the reference, and I try to recreate with the dry brush and brushing against the paper surface. And when you are painting petal veins, take a look carefully in the reference how those petal veins are formed, the direction of those petal veins, how you can see that there goes one petal vein and then it slightly separates into two and then it connects with another one. Catch that look of the veins and try to do the same in your painting. More shadow in the inner part of water drop, and I noticed that that inner shadow area is going even a little bit further around the water drop on the inner part of the water drop. Smoothing, adding more, gradually, lightly. You can see the changes with each layer are very subtle, very small, but it gradually becomes more and more realistic and more like in reference. Mixing another amount of watercolors, ultramarine blue and permanent rose, and with round synthetic brush applying more. And as you can see, my color tone slightly differs. It's more to the blue side, and that's okay. I'm layering transparently, and if the color tone slightly is different from the previous one, don't be stressed about it. Smoothing the applied layer for more gradual transitions from the shadow area to the lighter area. Pushing watercolors towards the lighter area and smoothing slightly with the movements of round synthetic brush. Don't rub too hard against the paper surface. Try to be light as possible in order not to damage the paper surface. And wait between the layers to paper dry. Paper needs time to rest so it can receive another layer of watercolors. Now applying more pink watercolor mix On the left side of this petal, I see in the reference that there's more pink to it than my painting has, and also smoothing the applied layer. Working gradually and transparently, moving my way to the result that I see in the reference. Adding more fine brush strokes with the very tip of the brush, and try to make those fine lines light. Don't make them too dark contrasty. The more light lines you will add in this stage of painting, the more realistic and lifelike it will look. Those very beautiful fine lines give a very nice touch to watercolor painting. Makes it more fluffier, lifelike, but it's a matter of thin and light lines. The more you will add them, the beautiful this petal will start to look. Here's a closer look of my fine brush strokes. I'm working with the very tip of the brush. It's almost like only one bristle is touching the paper surface, so lines should be fine. Turning paper as it's more convenient for you, so you are more freer in your brush strokes and in hand movement. Don't squeeze your hand too hard. If you start to feel some pressure in your hand and shoulder, it means you are holding your brush too tight, too stressful, and it can only cause you pain and thicker brush strokes. Try to hold your brush as light as possible. All movements should be light and fine. I compared to the reference and noticed that some parts are still much lighter than in the reference. That light area is too light compared to the reference, and with round synthetic brush I'm adding more transparent layers, gradually building layers, building this realistic and volume to this petal. Mixing ultramarine blue with permanent rose. And applying with round synthetic brush strokes in the shadow area. Now I'm not applying smooth layer, but finer brush strokes with round synthetic brush. They are not so thin like from the finer tip brush, but they still give this extra layer and extra pattern on this petal. Adding shadow on the right side, also on the lower part. With finer tip brush, making petal veins slightly darker, more visible. Adding shadow in the inner part of this water drop, making it more stand out. But everything I compare constantly to the reference. As I'm reaching closer to the finishing part, I took a picture of my painting, place it together with the reference in mono. I see how much I need to paint more. I see tonal values and I notice that my painting still needs some darkness, missing some shadow area. Then I can come back to my painting and add those things that I noticed I'm missing. I'm missing some shadow area on the lower part around the water drop. I'm missing shadow on the right side of this petal. This technique is very good to take a picture in the painting process of your painting, because the more you work on your painting, you stop noticing some little things in your painting. So taking a picture, placing it right beside your reference and making it in monochrome, it is possible in different apps. You can do it on your phone and compare. I made another photo and now it looks much closer in terms of tonal value. In my painting process, in these tutorials, I'm not aiming for 100% accuracy with the reference. I'm showing you the way, the approach, how to paint, how to create realistic looking paintings, and it's up to you. If you want to push yourself a little bit further and paint more realistic with much more details, you can definitely do it. So the petal is done. I'm really happy with the result. The water drop looks realistic, almost like it will drip off the paper. Hope you learned something new from this tutorial and enjoyed the process of painting this anemone flower petal with the water drop. Would like to hear your thoughts on this tutorial and on your process. Thank you for watching and see you in my next tutorials. Bye bye!